Angela Merkel has made her first trip abroad since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic to Brussels. The Chancellor was there to lay out Germany's priorities as it takes over the European presidency. Topping that agenda will be reaching an agreement on the recovery fund. Angela Merkel met with EU chiefs and addressed the parliament. The EU member states do not have a consensus on how the €750 billion plan to help restart economies will be delivered. Leaders will meet face-to-face at a summit on the 17th of July to try and secure an agreement.
We must, of course, agree on the instruments for the reliability of the multi-annual financial framework, but also for the reconstruction fund. Because we are faced with a situation of unprecedented economic collapse, there are concerns about employment, and the right response must be found.
Well, let's cross over to the Belgian capital now, where we can speak to our reporter, Brian Carter. Brian, good to see you there. Well, of course, this is Angela Merkel's first trip to Brussels since Germany took over the EU's rotating presidency. What are her priorities?
Hello, Tux. Well, as you said, this is the second time that she's taken over the rotating presidency of the EU in the 15 years since she's been in power. And during her speech, she insisted a lot on European unity, on fundamental rights, recalling her own experience as someone who grew up in East Germany. She said that she had to wait 35 years before she could live in a free society. And she said that in a warning against a rollback of fundamental rights. She said that whether it's the pandemic or this massive economic crisis that the EU is facing should not be an excuse to roll back fundamental rights in the EU. She also talked about climate, that this should be a priority for every member state in the EU. She talked about Brexit and the need to find a good trade deal with the UK. But as you said before, her presidency, the next 6 months, will probably be overshadowed by this economic crisis. We had the numbers yesterday. The European GDP will contract by 8.3% this year, and the EU leaders really want to make sure that this economic crisis doesn't translate into massive unemployment, and that's why, as you said, they will meet here next week to find an agreement.
Okay. Well, she also mentioned the European recovery package, of course, which we've been discussing extensively here. What did Angela Merkel have to say about that today?
So she insisted that the leaders needed to find an agreement before the summer recess. So that means basically they need to find an agreement next week when they meet here. But there are still a lot of divergences and a lot of conflicting opinions amongst different EU member states. That's why there are a lot of discussions going on at the moment between the different leaders of the EU institutions and the different member states. Basically, you have two big groups and two sides in this debate. You have on the one side those that we call the frugal four. That's the Netherlands, Austria, Denmark, and Sweden, who want this money to be allocated in the form of loans with certain conditionalities attached. And on the other side, you have countries mostly in the south who want this money to be allocated mostly in form of grants and who want minimal conditionality. So these, of course, they need to find some kind of consensus, some kind of agreement between those member states. But there's a whole lot of other issues. How much money each state will get based on what calculations? How will this money be allocated? All these things, they need to find an agreement, so it's a very important package. And Tux, as you know, here in Brussels, whenever there's money involved, things tend to get a bit complicated.